Welcome. I'm Sabrina Hargrave, Program Officer at Brooklyn Community Foundation, working on our Immigrant Rights Fund. Thank you for joining us today for the third discussion in our Change Starts Here webinar series. This series builds on the work of organizations and communities supported through Brooklyn Community Foundation's Brooklyn COVID-19 Response Fund. By the end of April, the Biden administration will reach its 100-day milestone, a traditional benchmark in the path of a presidential administration. Today, we will discuss the most pressing issues facing immigrant communities right now, both on the local and national level, in the context of the new White House administration. I'd like to share a few logistical notes. Throughout our session today, please submit any questions that you have in the Q&A box. You can find the Q&A box on the bottom of the screen. We will address your questions toward the end of the webinar. We also have live closed captions available. Please look to the bottom of your screen to turn those on by clicking the arrow on closed caption and selecting show subtitle. Throughout the webinar, you can look back at what has been said by clicking on view full transcript or adjust the size of the captions on your screen by sharing subtitle settings. Before diving in, a few words about Brooklyn Community Foundation. Founded in 2009, we are the first and only public foundation dedicated to New York City's largest borough. Everything we do is rooted in our explicit commitment to racial justice. To date, we have granted more than $60 million to vital organizations working across our borough. We established the Immigrant Rights Fund in late 2016 in response to mounting uncertainty and fear within Brooklyn's immigrant communities, and in the face of dangerous and exclusionary government policies. Since launching, the fund has distributed close to $1.7 million in 114 grants to support frontline and advocacy organizations serving Brooklyn. The fund continues to invest in local organizations working to dismantle oppressive policies while expanding access and opportunities for immigrants living in Brooklyn. We work alongside an Immigrant Rights Fund Advisory Council composed of community members with lived experience in grantmaking. In early March 2020, we launched our Brooklyn COVID-19 Response Fund, and it was among the first funds nationally to prioritize addressing the pandemic's impacts on Black, Indigenous, and other communities of color. In the first phase of this work, we distributed $3.3 million through 420 grants to 246 organizations across our borough, thanks to the generosity of more than 1,600 donors. We have supported and continue to support organizations providing urgent and ongoing direct relief to communities in Brooklyn to alleviate needs caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, including anti-Asian bias and violence, food insecurity, and lost wages. Our next phase of grant making will bring the fund's total commitment to nearly $7 million. We continue to fundraise for our Brooklyn COVID-19 Response Fund because we know that there is still a long road ahead. The systemic inequalities exacerbated by the pandemic will not disappear when the pandemic subsides. We began phase 2 last fall with Brooklyn Insights 2020, an 8-week community engagement process to learn from and partner with the communities most impacted by the pandemic in order to identify and invest in community-led solutions to achieve structural change, as well as urgent ongoing needs. We recently released our report on Brooklyn Insights 2020, which you can view at bcfny.org/COVID-19/phase 2. And today we are thrilled to premiere a new video in our Stories of Brooklyn Insights 2020 series right here with you.
Mi mamá sí estuvo ya anteriormente enferma, pero ella empezó a agravarse en marzo. Le dio un infarto y murió. Y mi papá también se enferma y él se interna igualmente en el mismo hospital, pero él murió para abril. Y sí ha sido muy difícil para mí.
You're not even a lawful permanent resident, you're certainly not a citizen. And that impacts your ability to get stable jobs. And we have a lot of families who have unstable income.
Soy indocumentada. Yo soy cajera en un supermercado, solo el tiempo que no pude regresar a trabajar por el miedo a contagiarme.
Putting our people, the most vulnerable people, in the front lines to die when things like this happen.
Cuando pasó lo de mi mamá, fue algo que me impactó demasiado porque ellos me dijeron que me la iban a mandar. Cuando me dicen que ella murió, yo no lo podía creer. Llamé más que todo para que me ayudaran a presionar al consulado porque sabía que ellos ya estaban dando ayuda. Y entonces llamé a Mixteca para que ellos me ayudaran a presionar y de ahí ellos me ayudaron, pero fue más que todo.
We know the Latinx community and the indigenous community was the most affected. It's a systemic issue that is repeating and repeating and repeating. And I think this is really reflecting how neglected we are. We need a lot of services.
Hi, how are you? When we talk about immigration, the narratives also exclude queer immigrants. We have to always fight to be seen. So there's a lot of struggles that queer immigrant in Brooklyn experience, and then COVID had made it worse. A lot of them are struggling with homelessness, not having money to take care of their needs. QDEP, we provide holistic support for everyone from anywhere you're coming from, and also everyone within the umbrella of the LGBTQ, to make sure that other people like me don't have to go through the same experience that I went through.
Well, the Center for Family Life focuses on serving neighborhood immigrant families with their legal issues, primarily immigration. Without it, folks would not seek an attorney at all.
Y yo estamos tratando de ver si podemos arreglar los papeles. Yo sí he pagado mis taxes para poder quedarnos aquí porque para darle una mejor oportunidad a mi hija.
They're working far more many hours than people who are documented, and they have a lot to offer.
Como se dice, que no quedarnos callados, que buscar ayuda, porque hay muchas organizaciones como Mixteca y Brooklyn Community Foundation que están ahí para ayudarnos.
You are not alone. We are here with you, and we're going to do something to fix it. We believe in the justice for our immigrant community, but we're going to keep fighting for that.
This is Brooklyn Insights 2020. It's time for change, and change starts here.
And with that, our panel moderator today is Mazin Sidahmed, co-executive director at Documented, a new nonprofit news site devoted solely to covering New York City's immigrants and the policies that affect their lives through original reporting. Mazin previously worked for The Guardian US in New York during the 2016 US elections, where he covered a variety of issues, including surveillance and criminal justice, as well as the rise of hate crimes following the election. Mazin left the news desk to join the award-winning Guardian Mobile Innovation Lab, where he helped to develop new mobile-specific story formats. He started his career writing for the Daily Star in Beirut, where he reported on the Syrian refugee crisis, weapons transfers to Lebanon, and the plight of migrant domestic workers. Our panelists include Murad Awawdeh, Executive Director of New York Immigration Coalition, and Abraham Paulos, Deputy Director at Black Alliance for Just Immigration. Murad Awawdeh is a strategist, organizer, and advocacy expert currently serving as the Executive Director at the New York Immigration Coalition. The son of Palestinian immigrants, Murad has dedicated over 2 decades of his life fighting for low-income communities of color across the state of New York. He grew up organizing to stop dangerous and hazardous development in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, and engaging community residents to build power and bring transformational change to their neighborhoods. As the NYIC's Executive Vice President of Advocacy and Strategy, he successfully led electoral, legislative, and policy campaigns at the federal, state, and local levels, and mobilized hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers at demonstrations against anti-immigrant policies. Murad serves as trustee of the New York University Family Health Center's board, as a member of the Justice 2020 Committee, and as a commissioner of the New York City Civic Engagement Commission. Abraham Paulos is Deputy Director of Communications and Policy of the Black Alliance of Just Immigration. Abraham is a seasoned communications expert, journalist, and movement leader who has advocated for human rights for more than a decade. He develops and implements BAJI's overall communication strategy nationwide in collaboration with BAJI members and staff. Before joining BAJI, Abraham was the executive director of Families for Freedom, a position he held after facing immigration detention at Rikers Island and becoming a member of FSF. As a journalist, Abraham reported on urban policy and human rights for City Limits, the New York City Civic Affairs magazine, and for the Foreign Policy Association, writing about foreign policy and global issues. Abraham is a stateless Eritrean refugee born in Sudan and raised in Chicago. He's a graduate of George Washington University with a degree in international affairs and a master's at the New School University. I'd like to invite our guests to join us on camera, and I'll hand the mic over to Mazin to kick off our panel discussion.
Thank you so much, Sabrina and the Brooklyn Community Foundation, for providing this platform. Really excited for this conversation with Murad and Abraham. So, you know, we're here to discuss the first 100 days of the Biden administration. It feels like a lot has already happened. So we have a lot of big topics that I want to get through today. So I'm just gonna dive right into this. So the first thing that I wanted to ask both of you about was what's been happening at the border. So I'm sure many of the participants are aware of the fact that, you know, one of the biggest immigration stories to come out of the administration so far is the rise in the number of unaccompanied minors coming into the US after the Biden administration rescinded just a part of the Title 42, which basically prevented any immigrants from coming into the US during the pandemic or crossing the border during the pandemic. This has created a range of issues, and, you know, a lot of unaccompanied minors end up here in New York in shelters as well. And there have been stories of unaccompanied minors spending far too long in Border Patrol facilities and, you know, living in really poor conditions. So one of the things that this has really shone a light on is the immigration infrastructure that exists in the US currently. So when you're looking at the Biden administration and you're looking towards the first term, what kind of infrastructure are you hoping this Biden administration could build so that when, you know, refugees or asylum seekers, are coming to the border, they aren't treated in the way that they're currently treated? And what could be done to make sure that families and children who are arriving from around the world are received better and are in better conditions? Abraham, do you want to kick us off with that?
Sure. I mean, I don't want to kick us off with that because that was a great question, but I'll take a stab at it. Murad, you got out of this one. Okay, so just a couple of things to back up on, to build a context about what's happening at the border, particularly for Black immigrants, right? And I'll let Murad talk about sort of the refugee population in general. But for Black immigrants, we have been coming to Mexico probably in the last decade or so by the numbers, ever since Europe closed off their borders, right? And so Africans, particularly Cameroonians, Eritreans, Ethiopians, Angolans, have been crossing through South America, through the jungles of Central America, to end up at Mexico with our Central American brothers and sisters trying to get into the United States. I want to be clear, because that's a great question about infrastructure, right? And I think it has to be rooted in the philosophy that freedom of movement is a human right, right? And so we are not just talking about people that want to come to the US to go to Disneyland, right? We are talking about people that have come from horrible, unmentionable things, that have crossed through many, many countries, which is traumatic in itself. I would say that the journey itself is like asylum worthy. Then to get to a border and have the United States, which is the #1 sort of considers itself, right, the free world, the free country of the free world, right, to be able to be not only denied entry, but then to be incarcerated, right, treated as if this is a problem that can be solved with cages, right? And so we've always sort of had that problem at the border. I mean, I think the quickest answer to the infrastructure question is open borders, right? And not, there have been presidents that have been for that. Ronald Reagan and the George Bush debate was one of those. What we are seeing right now, right? And we go through this cycle. Under Trump administration, it was called the caravan. I don't remember if folks remember, right? All of a sudden, we start having conversations around immigration legislation. Congress starts to twiddle their thumbs. And then right before we get a deal, there's always this surge, right, of people coming into the border, whether that is real or not. What is real, right, is the deportations of Haitians under the Title 42. I guess it's a clause in the law, right, that basically says that due to some type of disease or pandemic, right, that they will be able to deny entry to human beings trying to come in, right? And again, these folks aren't coming for vacation, right? This is a serious situation in which we need to sort of approach it with a human rights angle. And so Title 42 is being used to essentially, right, expel by the greater numbers, right, Black refugees, right? And our Central American brothers and sisters and the families that are down there too, right, are going through essentially the same thing that we are going through. But Black people happen to be a very vulnerable, right, population. And the reason why we center a lot of our border work around that, just, you know, for the simple fact, those that are denied freedom, no freedom the most. And so what we are seeing at the border, it's going to take a shifting of philosophy, right? And something even easier than that, which Biden didn't do, made a promise that he was going to increase the number of refugee admissions, right? But he kept it at Trump numbers at 15,000, right? So a simple thing would be to raise it, I mean, to 62,500. So I hope I answered your question by building a little context of the border, but then two ways in which we can move forward by solving it. One, right, understanding that everyone has the freedom of movement, and refugees are coming for protection, right, not for a vacation. And then second is to up the refugee admissions number.
Absolutely, that was fantastic. And we're going to get into the refugee admissions in more detail later on, but Murad, did you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, and thank you for the question, Mazin, and thank you, Abraham, for going first. It is, I think this is part of this whiplash that you are also seeing across the board on immigration issues, the Biden administration trying to figure out what to do, because they're falling into the traps of the Trump administration that they left those traps in for them a while ago. And the same people who are, you know, beating the drum about immigration are under the Trump administration are still the ones doing it today. And that person is Stephen Miller, and he is being utilized by the right to really uplift, you know, anti-immigrant policies to continue being in the limelight, so that they can try to come back into power on that as well. What I do want to say is that unaccompanied minors coming through the southern border are reuniting with their family that are here. You know, I think that there is a lot of times when we talk about it as if, you know, children are just coming over on their own, but they are coming over to meet with and reunite with their parents. And that is the story that a lot of folks forget to mention. What can we do to fix or improve the situation? ICE and CBP have been funded the highest they've ever been funded. I don't think funding them anymore is going to help this situation. What we should be doing is doubling down on the Office of Refugee Resettlement and making sure that they have the resources to care for the children, and at the same time be able to reconnect them with their loved ones who are here in the United States. And there is no simple solution to this, because we've been living in a world where we have shut the southern border down for the past couple of years under the previous administration. And I think that Title 42 really makes it even more complicated for people to come into the United States under COVID, and the Biden administration, Title 42 is a Trump administration policy, and the Biden administration has left it remarkably in place after 100 days still in office. So I do think that we need to have more infrastructure that isn't enforcement, that isn't part of ICE and the CBP apparatus, but really allow these children and other folks who are coming through the southern border have the opportunity to resettle here with support from the Office of Refugee Resettlement.
Fantastic answers. Yeah, I have so many follow-up questions on that, but we have a lot of ground to cover, and I'm going to be kind of jumping around the place. But I really encourage everybody who's listening to put your Q&A in the chat. I'm going to try and get through my questions just to leave as much time as possible for people in the audience to ask questions. So please do follow up. Those are really, really fantastic answers. So one of the central points to the Trump administrations was ICE and ICE activity. Trump weaponized and glorified ICE as a political tool, and to the detriment of immigrant communities in New York and across the country. The deportation moratorium was something that was spoken about a lot prior to Biden coming into office. It was not realized in the way that a lot of advocates had expected it to be realized. And, we've seen recently in New Jersey that a decision to rescind the contract that a local county had with ICE to detain immigrants was reneged on based off of the Biden administration coming in. I'm just interested to hear from both of you. What are you hearing from your members, your partners on the ground about how ICE activity has shifted in these first 100 days, if there's been any shift at all? Either one of you could.
Yeah, I don't think that ICE's work has shifted. ICE continues to do what ICE does, which is target and arrest, detain, and deport immigrant community members across the state of New York. We saw, the way that the Biden administration celebrated Black History Month was by deporting the most Haitians in the month that they could. And United We Dream just put out today that the administration has, in the first 100 days, has deported over 300,000 people. So it's not like the administration or ICE are having a slowdown. If anything, they're on par with potentially beating Obama numbers if this continues. And I'm not sure if the Biden administration wants to be known as Deporter-in-Chief 2.0, but we are, there's a difference between, I know that folks will say, well, the executive order that Biden signed was held up by the courts. Well, you can also just tell your Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security to stop deporting people. Like it's not that complicated. It's like a directive. And I think that is the other piece here, is that we keep going back and forth with technicalities of like why we can't do something as opposed to just doing it. And I think if we had the courage of the Trump administration to do whatever it is that they wanted it to do, I think that we would be significantly further along with really meeting the moment for our communities, because that's what's missing right now, is that this administration, as well as they have been doing on other issues on immigration, they're pretty much falling flat here.
Absolutely, Murad. And just to back Murad up, I mean, like ICE and CBP, right? Immigration, Customs Enforcement, Customs Border Patrol, right? Do what they do, right? And what they do is essentially, they call it enforcement, right? And just to give people like a flashback, before ICE CBP, it used to be called Immigration Naturalization Service. Now it's under Department of Homeland Security, right? And that shift in 2003 after 9/11 and in the beginning of the war on terror, right? Essentially, the government got together and saw, oh, well, we have this immigration issue. How are we going to, quote unquote, fix it or solve it? And they were like, well, let's go to war, right? So when you fund police like ICE, CBP, when you fund weapons in cages more than you fund refugee resettlement services, right? You're essentially saying that we're going to address this issue by going to war. The US has been known to do this, right? The war on drugs, right, was a situation in which Black communities were going through an issue around social services being cut, pain management with the drugs, right? And the US decided to, okay, cool, let's go to war on this issue, right? And so the funding of ICE and CBP, the growing funding of it, right, only says one thing to me and to my community. They're only escalating, right, the home rates. They're only escalating the separation of our families, right? And essentially they're only escalating sort of the war that they have on immigrants that really started out in 1996, which is the last time immigration law has changed in this country, and the laws that run what we see right now. And that was under a Clinton administration. Biden was a part of that. Biden was also a part of the 1993 crime bill, right? I'm not gonna go through Biden's resume, but I will just say it's that I'm not surprised. And in fact, I'm actually impressed by how consistently anti-Black he's been and how consistently he or his administration thinks they're gonna solve problems, right? By putting weapons into officers' hands like ICE and CBP to sort of say, yeah, this is a good way to solve our immigration issue.
Consistency. I respect that. Okay. Great. So as I said previously, please put your questions in the Q&A. There's a lot there to unpack. So, I'm sure everyone has follow-up questions. Don't be shy about putting your questions in the Q&A, and we will get to them. So jumping around once more, we're going to get to the issue of refugees. So this has been in the news for the past couple of weeks. To give everyone some context, the Biden administration campaigned heavily on dramatically increasing the refugee cap, which is the number of refugees that the US admits every year. The Trump administration had dropped it to the lowest number of all time, 15,000, after consistently dropping it each year. Biden came in and said that, even before setting the refugee cap, which was usually set at the beginning of the fiscal year in October, they were going to go ahead and allow 62,500 refugees in this fiscal year. According to some reporting that was done by the New York Times and other outlets, the Biden administration was worried after getting a lot of backlash from Republicans about the situation at the border, and decided to rescind on that and return to the amount set by Stephen Miller and the Trump administration, which is 15,000, and then kind of backtracked again and said they may reconsider in May. So there's been a lot of miscommunication and back and forth, and it seems just general fear and backtracking on this. So I had a question for each of you. For Murad, I was wondering if you could touch on the bungled communication of this rollout of the refugee cap. What does that do for trust in immigrant communities, and what does that say to you about the direction the Biden administration is going to take moving forward? And for Abraham, I was wondering if you could touch on a very relevant issue to the refugee cap. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, but also on TPS. TPS is, I can let you speak to the kind of background and context on TPS, but the Biden administration has sent mixed messages on that also, about whether or not temporary protected status holders can have a pathway to citizenship in the US. So yeah, I would wonder if each of you could speak on those issues. Murad, could you kick us off?
Sure. I don't think that the the Biden administration bungled the announcement. I do know that they did not expect the whiplash that they did get once it did drop. And that's what helped them realize the mistake that they had made. And in the announcement, it's also that it was mentioned that it's at the president's discretion to change the numbers at his will. And that's the response that they gave. Well, he decided to change it at his will after the massive blowback that the White House was getting. I think just thinking about the refugee resettlement numbers being at their lowest, they're not just at their lowest. Trump gutted the entire resettlement infrastructure across the United States. So it's going to take some time to rebuild it, and at the same time, increasing the numbers to be able to meet the need that's there. So I think that they rightfully bringing the number back up was the right thing to do, but also now they need to quickly refund the organizations that were on the ground doing this work to resettle folks as quickly as possible, because without that, we're not going to be able to bring people in. Like, who's going to receive them on this end, right? So I think that for what the Trump administration did to the refugee program needs to quickly be undone. It's not just about the numbers, right? It needs to actually the infrastructure for that program needs to be rebuilt, and very quickly. Here in New York, we saw the Refugee Resettlement Agency on Long Island close its doors because they just couldn't make it anymore. Across Western and Central New York, the same thing. And that devastated communities because the refugee communities were coming in and providing, local bumps to the economies, and having the economies be really jumping where they haven't been. So I think that we're in a really interesting place with this administration, and I hope that the lesson was learned on what happens if you backtrack on a campaign promise, as well as a commitment that you make to the communities that you are going to be serving, on really turning your back on them, with this as an example of not doing it. So, I think that this is going to be a challenge. And if this, which refugee resettlement has not been very controversial in the past, right? But for it to kind of be scapegoated in this way because of what's happening on the southern border, where children are trying to reunite with their families, it's kind of telling to see what is coming down the pike.
Thank you, Murad. So my question is temporary protected status. Okay. For temporary protected status is exactly what it sounds like. It is usually given to a group of, I guess, nationalities, right? Certain citizens from a certain country that is going under some extraordinary duress, right? Political instability. Lately, it's been more about like the climate crisis and the environmental damage. The greatest example is El Salvador with the earthquake, right? And Haiti with the earthquake in 2010. Temporary protected status is just that. It's temporary, right? And what we fight for at BAJI is actually looking for permanent protections, right? And right now, the most administrations, right, what they like to do is just sort of redesignate it, right? The proverbial kick the can down the road, and they continue to redesignate it, basically extending the temporary part. At a certain point, right, when you have families like the El Salvadorian community, the Haitian community that came on TPS, at a certain point, the word temporary just needs to just leave. And it needs to be a pathway towards permanent protection, right? Because, I mean, I came to this country as a refugee in the 80s, right? My country conditions have changed. Till this day, I'm still considered a refugee, right? And I find that to be a little bit obscure, right? When we're starting to talk about the lives that we build here, the families that we build here, right? And our livelihood. So we really want to move towards permanent protections. And I think the biggest threat that I see, right, coming from this administration around the path to citizenship or the path to permanent protections is the criminalization of the legislation that's being pumped out by the Biden administration. I know Biden has the Citizenship Act, right? The Biden citizenship legislation. There's the Dream and Promise Act, right? And then I think there's the Essential Workers Act, right? The problem with all of these bills, right, is that we think that they're anti-Black. And we think that they're anti-Black because of the criminal bars that are embedded in each of these legislations, right? And why is that important, right? Because if any of these bills pass, right, folks are not going to be citizens overnight. It will take 3, 5, or 7 years, right? Where they will be non-citizens in the United States. And that means that they are going to have to live in communities where there is no over-policing, live in communities where there is no sort of being targeted and killed by the criminal legal sanction system, right? And so an example, if you have, I think, more than 3 misdemeanors or a felony of some sort, the most dangerous is any gang involvement, right? And I can't help but think of Adam Toledo, right? Who was a young, he was a kid, 7th grader that got shot in Chicago, right? So even these minors that are coming from the border into the US, the interior, right, enforcement is going to make that path to citizenship, right, that path to permanent protections, an obstacle course, right, particularly for young folks. And I think that when it comes down to temporary protected status, and we saw this under the Trump administration, is that when they wanted to redesignate Haiti, right, 2017, Stephen Miller, as Murad mentioned, right, came out with a whole task force, right, to see if anyone that was reapplying for Haitian TPS had any contact with the criminal system, right? And so when it comes down to particularly Black immigrants who are in this country, we are still under the cloak, under the myth of Black criminality. And the legislations that Biden, each and every one of them, right, that the Democratic Party and the Biden administration is pushing, right, has this whole like concept that the criminal bars, right, are somehow going to make this country safer. And I think that looking towards the future of this administration, particularly 2024, right, is that we're going to have a lot of issues like ICE and CBP, right, picking up people that are on temporary protected status, that are on refugee status, or whatever status that these bills will put people on that isn't permanent.
Wow, incredible. I would just encourage anyone attending to follow the work of BAJI to get more context and information on this issue. They've done incredible research, the state of Black immigrants, and a number of other studies on this topic. So please do follow up on that if you're interested. And as I said, drop any questions that you have right now in the chat. It's a great time to pick both of these people's minds. Let's bring it locally and talk about the New York State Excluded Workers Fund. So as the participants may know, all of the stimulus packages that have come out over the past year in response to COVID have not included undocumented immigrants who have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, either financially and in terms of health as well. So after a lot of pressure from local groups, a hunger strike in New York City and other places, New York State included a $2.1 billion relief fund in this year's budget to provide checks, direct checks, and other forms of assistance to undocumented New Yorkers and their families with certain requirements. There was another fund earlier this year, or last year, I should say, funded by OSF, about $20 million for emergency relief for immigrant families as well, that had some issues around the rollout and how people could get access to it. So first of all, actually, I'm interested in hearing about what role your organizations played in helping get the fund passed, and how you feel about the rollout and making sure that people who actually need this get access to it straight away. Either one of you could kick us off.
Yeah, I think the Fund for Excluded Workers is an amazing campaign of a coalition of over 300 organizations across the state of New York. The NYIC was a steering committee of the coalition and helped really drive the pressure up in key areas throughout the state. And I think that the intent of the campaign was really to ensure that people who were left out were not left out any longer. That the state should follow the footsteps of California, who did this back when, at the height of the pandemic in California, they did this and gave every single person who lived in California direct relief. And it was shocking that New York had not done something to actually step up in this regard. And even as we advocated prior to the state legislator coming back, we were told that there is no money. And it was funny how we found money for other things, but could not find money for immigrants in the state. So the campaign, I think, was amazing. We had, almost daily actions leading up to the end of the budget and ensuring that families who were left out were going to get support. And, it wasn't perfect how it ended up. And, it is a two-tiered system for folks who can illustrate financial impact on their over the past year. But they can receive up to $15,600. And for others who cannot, they can receive up to, I think it's $3,200, which is the equivalent of the amount of stimulus checks that were given by the time the fund was created. And you also have to prove eligibility as that you live in the state prior to the pandemic and that you still currently live here. So I think that the campaign is still working. Just because we won doesn't mean that it's over, right? We still have work to do. We still have to work with Department of Labor to ensure that they're the ones who are administering the program, that the program gets set up as quickly as possible and is not cumbersome for people to access the funds, and that we actually move this as quickly as possible so that we actually get the help that people need in their hands as soon as possible.
Yeah, BAJI wasn't necessarily, I don't think we were a part of that campaign, but shout out to that campaign. That was fantastic. Murad, thank you for the work that you put in on that. I think that it is extremely helpful, right? That these funds, that people that put themselves on the front line, I think someone in the video had said, right? That it's a no-brainer to me. And I think that I just get really angry that I'm like, this is what we have to fight for. But I appreciate that campaign for being able to do that, right? I also want to say is that I also appreciate the undocumented community in New York that without any help was able to organize themselves, right? And build infrastructures in which community members were still being taken care of, in which bread and water was still getting to the table, right? Via these mutual aid networks, right? Before they even thought that the government was going to help them, right? Because they know what it is. And so what I was just amazed by and extremely impressed was how our communities, right, in New York City, immigrant communities that are really out here keeping this city moving, right, was able to sort of say, hey, we can operate outside of a government structure and be able to, we keep us safe, we keep us going, right? And I think for me, that has been the most profound thing that I have learned, right, about New York City immigrants during a pandemic, that they were able to sort of say, hey, you know what? We are going to make sure that our children are taken care of, that our community members are taken care of. So the real shout out goes out to the community and then to Murad in this campaign to be able to just do something that to me is about dignity and just respect. Like, have we lost all of that? The one sort of critique I do have, and it's mostly around messaging, not about the campaign, but just in general in the country, I think that as far as immigrants go, there's this tie, right? And it doesn't really sit right with me, sort of around this idea that we deserve citizenship, we deserve permanent protections because we are essential workers. This country has a horrible, horrible past, right? About linking a person's self-worth, right, with labor. Right, and we don't need the history, but it's always been there. And I think that messaging wise, right, want to start sort of changing that by sort of saying, no, we deserve permanent protections because we are human beings, and it is a human right, right? And I don't want our justice to be tied to how much our labor can support a capitalist system, right? And I think that for me, again, these are people, these are residents. This is like my family and my community. And to make sure that we're shifting, that we are earning the dignity, right? It's not that we deserve it. We are earning our human rights and our fundamental right of movement, the fundamental right to have a livelihood based on dignity. So I just kind of wanted to throw that out there. And then I think you had asked about locally, what's going on sort of. I mean, I think in the Black immigrant community, I think we're trying to figure out this marijuana law that just passed, right? That just passed in the state, right? And to really start to see is that how is this going to affect non-citizens, immigrants in New York City, particularly the youth, right? We do understand that NYPD is no longer involved, right? But does that civil infraction, which is what you'll get, or a fine, right? How will that affect if you are trying to adjust your status, right? Like I am a non-citizen. One day I would like to become a citizen, a citizen, and understanding how does that, things like the decriminalization of certain things, how is that going to affect people's application process when it comes to adjusting their status from temporary citizen or whatever it is to permanent. So I just wanted to just add that since you asked about the local context.
Fantastic. I'm really glad you did. I could talk to you all for a lot longer, but I'm going to give everyone else some time. I'm going to pass it over to Sabrina now so we could get in some questions.
Thank you all. Thank you all so much for what's been covered so far. There's been a question about the process of unaccompanied minors and understanding a little bit more about that process, including if they're released to families in New York, and then does ACS need to be involved in the process? So does anyone have a little bit more information about kind of what that journey looks like?
Murad, I was gonna pass it to you.
If you want to go, Abraham, you can, but if not, I can jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I just have like basic general knowledge. I mean, yeah, I'm gonna let Murad. Yeah, you do it.
Yeah, I think that the children, when they come to the U.S., have a sense of where their family are and have a phone number with them. And then when they are getting processed, that person gets called. There's a couple of checks that need to happen. So the children are usually transferred to what we would also consider like a shelter, like a children's outside of when they're held at the southern border, they'll be moved to area closest to where their next of kin is. So if that's, Long Island or the Hudson Valley, there are places and institutions in New York State that have contracts with ORR to process and hold these children until a family member is able to come in, take them, and then there's a process of verification. But it's not an easy process either. So I would not say there are shelters that accept children, and especially here in the state of New York, there are a few. And back in 2015, when there were a lot of unaccompanied minors coming here as well, I would say that half came to New York City, and we really didn't feel the impact of that because New York City has a lot of different programs that can absorb young people into the school system, provide them with holistic care, and so on and so forth. But places like Long Island, where their school systems rely heavily on having pre-calculated how many students will be there for that year, a year in advance, that's where you saw some tension growing when the schools started to have a lot more students in them, and the same in the Hudson Valley. But I don't see that happening this year so far.
I would just add that I think the person that asked about ACS, and they're not involved in the process. The shelters may have contracts with ACS, but those ACS as an agency is not involved in the process. So the contract and where the children are held is separate is a separate contract and a separate procedure that goes through the federal government.
Thank you all. And we've heard so much about you all and your expertise. And I was wondering if you can give a little bit of a plug about the organizations that you work for and represent and what you all do, including any direct services that you provide to people here locally, thinking about immigrants that live at the intersections of multiple identities, including those who are living with HIV, for example. So Murad, can we start with you?
Sure. The NYIC, which is the New York Immigration Coalition, is one of the oldest and largest organizations of its type. We have over 200 member organizations across the state of New York, from Buffalo down to Brooklyn, to the east end of Long Island. Over the past couple of years, we've had significant growth in really, getting more folks and more organizations committed to fighting for immigrant justice. We're an advocacy and policy organization that does some coordination of services and provides some direct services. But I would ask for folks who are interested in finding, I'm not sure what kind of services, other than if they're looking for healthcare services, any healthcare institution, H&H has really great services for folks regardless of immigration status, and a number of other institutions. But I'm not sure what kind of health services or what kind of immigrant services that person would need.
Abraham, how about BAJI?
How about BAJI? No. Yeah, we are, essentially kind of what Murad said. We do a lot of political education. We find that to be very important, that people understand sort of where they are as Black people, right, in this country, that are trying to assimilate into Black America, which is different for other sort of immigrant groups, right? And so our education is really based on understanding just sort of what liberation looks like for us. And we use that education to organize our communities, right? And we have a chapter in New York. We're looking for New York City organizers. So if anyone knows of anybody, please send them our way. LA, Atlanta, and Miami. And we also do advocacy just like the NYIC, and we try to advocate for policies that will have like a real impact, right, on Black people, right, particularly those that live in immigrant communities. As far as our direct services go, in New York, we have sort of a mutual aid that's kind of our kind of go-to, and it's holistic in a lot of sense. Like, we help pay bond, we help get, sort of food. During the winter, it was like a clothing drive. And so, here in New York, if folks need any of that type of stuff, we're not necessarily like a service provider, but we did build that in to sort of help our communities out. Anywhere in New York, and any Black immigrant community. And then I think secondly, something that pertains to New York City is that, we have a staff attorney. So we really do try to get folks some legal help, which is always a problem in our communities. Folks don't understand the deportation process, right? And so we're there to help that out. And then I think our overall work in New York can really be summarized by, like, we really try to work against the criminalization of immigrants in New York City. And so that means making sure that they don't build new jails, and that means just, sort of checking the NYPD as often as we can.
Well, I'd like to extend my sincerest thanks and the Foundation's sincerest thanks to Mazin, Murad, and Abraham for joining us today. We are grateful for your time and expertise and all of the important work that you all are doing at this time. For anyone joining us from a nonprofit today, we currently have 2 open funding opportunities. Letters of inquiry for our Immigrant Rights Fund grants are due this Friday, April 30th. And letters of inquiry for our community-led social change grants are due next Friday, May 7th at 5 p.m. You can learn more on our website at bcfny.org/immigrant-rights-fund and at bcfny.org/COVID-19/apply. As I mentioned at the top of the webinar, our next phase of grant making will bring the Brooklyn COVID-19 Response Fund's total commitment to nearly $7 million. This work is far from over. For Black, Indigenous, and other communities of color, barriers to quality healthcare, education, housing, and financial security will not disappear when the pandemic subsides. Real change doesn't happen overnight, and that's why we're investing in long-term structural change, and we are continuing to fundraise to make this happen. Change starts here, and it starts with you. Please consider making a donation today to invest in a better future for Brooklyn at bcfny.org/donate. Thank you for joining us for this really important conversation. And be sure to sign up for upcoming webinars in the series at bcfny.org/webinars. Upcoming webinars include a talk with Heather McGee on her new book, The Sum of Us, What Racism Costs Everyone and How We Can Prosper Together, on Tuesday, May 11th at 12:30 p.m., and a conversation on COVID-19 healthcare equity and trust with founder and executive director of Health Justice, Dr. Oni Blackstock, and First Deputy Commissioner and Chief Equity Officer at the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, Dr. Torian Easterlin, on Tuesday, May 18th at 12:30 p.m. Thank you again for joining us and to our panelists today, and have a wonderful afternoon.